I, a 26-year-old male, and my girlfriend, a 27-year-old female, met in college when we were both taking the same calculus class. She was intelligent, and I took advantage of that by asking her for help with some of the work. I was an engineering major and had a better understanding of math than she did. We flirted often and eventually started dating. We were together for all 4 years of our undergraduate studies and lived together while attending separate graduate schools in the city. I couldn't imagine my life without her. We had been together for so long, and I saw a future with her. I wanted to propose, but I wanted to wait until we were both stable in our careers and truly ready for that step. Her family lived in Texas while we lived in New York, so she didn't get to see them often. I met them a few times, but I didn't know them very well. She had a great relationship with them, and they talked frequently. I knew she missed them more than anything, but she was happy living in the city. One evening, out of the blue, we received a phone call from her mother. Her sister had been in a car accident and was in the ICU. My girlfriend immediately packed a bag and bought the next available plane ticket to go see her. I wanted to go with her, but we decided it would be best for me to stay behind for a day to let her work know and schedule someone to take care of our dog. I did just that while she went ahead of me. While she was on the plane ride home, her mother called me and told me that her sister had passed away. I was heartbroken that I couldn't be there with her when she received the news. Her sister was one of her best friends, and they were often referred to as twins because of how similar they were. My girlfriend was 2 years younger than her, but they looked identical and sounded exactly the same. When she arrived in Texas, her trip changed from visiting her injured sister to helping plan a funeral. At her suggestion, I stayed behind longer than expected. She didn't want me to leave work until they had a date planned for the funeral. We couldn't afford to spend a lot on dog boarding or a dog sitter, so the shorter my time in Texas, the better. I called her often to check in on her while she was away. As time went on, it seemed like she was doing better. There were a few times when she didn't answer, so I would text her to check in. She would call me back later those nights and tell me that she had been at her sister's house, going through some of her things. Her sister was married to a man we'll call Joe. He was nice the few times I met him, but he seemed superficial to me. He wanted a big house, nice cars, and a hot wife. So that's exactly what he got in life. I always thought he wanted to marry my girlfriend's sister because she would be the perfect trophy wife. I knew that spending time at her sister's house would mean spending time with him, but she was grieving. It never crossed my mind that they would start sleeping together. Eventually, I flew down for the funeral and finally got to be with my girlfriend again. During the wake, Joe struck up a conversation with me and mentioned how he sometimes saw his late wife's sister in my girlfriend. His gaze lingered on her for longer than I felt comfortable, but I didn't say anything out of respect for his recent loss. However, he continued to bring up how difficult it was for my girlfriend and how I wasn't there for her. It felt like he was trying to guilt-trip me. After the funeral, my girlfriend and I returned to the city and tried to resume our normal routine. However, she was still grieving, and many things upset her. I did my best to support her, but she refused my help. Whenever I tried to comfort her, she would turn me away. She didn't even want to hold my hand. I assumed it was all part of her grieving process and that she was shutting me out. One day, I came home from work to find her trying on clothes that she had brought back from Texas. They were all her sister's belongings, things that Joe had bought for her before she passed away. I noticed she was taking a lot of pictures in the clothes as well. A few weeks later, she told me that Joe was coming to visit and would be staying with us. He needed to get away from their house and had never been to New York, so she invited him. I felt guilty for being upset about it, but I couldn't help it. I was still bothered by how Joe had looked at my girlfriend during his wife's wake, and on top of that, no one had asked for my permission. Despite my feelings, I didn't say anything because I knew it was a sensitive topic. In the days leading up to Joe's arrival, my girlfriend talked to him frequently. I would come home from work and see them FaceTiming, discussing all the places they wanted to go together. He called her often, and they texted each other frequently. This was not how their relationship had been before the funeral, and it made me uneasy. However, I didn't know how to address it. I was aware that no matter what I said, I would come across as a jerk because they were both still mourning. When Joe finally arrived in the city, my girlfriend and I helped him get settled in our apartment. She worked from home, and I worked a few blocks away, so she would be alone with him most of the time. My gut told me not to trust the situation. I hadn't seen any concrete evidence of something going on between them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship had changed drastically since the funeral. It was eating away at me, and I couldn't help but imagine all the conversations they had over text messages or when I wasn't around. My girlfriend looked so much like her sister, and I couldn't deny that Joe would be attracted to her. He probably always had been. One afternoon while I was at work, I sent my girlfriend a text asking if she wanted me to pick up food on my way home. Normally, she would respond within half an hour, even if she was in a meeting. However, this time she didn't reply. That time, however, she didn't respond at all. I was a little bit worried, so I left work a couple of hours early to go home and make sure everything was all right. Before I put the key in the door, I heard some very alarming noises on the other end. It was clear that someone was having sex in the apartment. As quietly as I could, I put my key in the door and opened it to find my girlfriend wearing one of her sister's dresses and having sex on the couch with Joe. They saw me, and she immediately jumped off of him, quickly putting herself back together to follow me down the hallway. I was done with her as soon as I saw it. I had my suspicions, and they were confirmed for me. Before I could get on the elevator, she slid through the door and started trying to explain herself. I didn't want to listen to her, but I was trapped with her and forced to. She told me that he was there for her when she was grieving, and it just happened the first time. She swore that she wasn't expecting it to happen again while he was visiting. They talked about it, and they both knew it was wrong. But it just happened again. I could tell that she was lying, so I asked to see her phone. She was almost shocked that I asked. I could tell that she wasn't expecting me to fight with her about it. Reluctantly, she handed me her phone. I found text messages between them, and it confirmed that she was lying. She apologized while I read through it all, but I knew that it wouldn't make a difference. They hooked up for the first time before her sister's funeral. She was at their house helping him look for a funeral dress for her, trying it on herself to see how it would look because they looked so similar. She told me that Joe saw her and something switched in his mind because of how much she looked like his wife. They had sex for the first time while she was trying on dresses for her sister to be buried in. From there, they developed some very strange bond where he practically pretended that my girlfriend was his dead wife. It was seriously messed up. The more she explained, the more disturbed I was with all of it. By the time we got off the elevator, Joe was catching up to us in the lobby of the apartment complex. It took everything in me not to run to him and attack him. I restrained myself and told my girlfriend that I never wanted to see her again, and strongly recommended both of them attend therapy. What they did was beyond troubling. I went to a friend's house and stayed there while I figured out what to do about my living situation. I didn't want to live in the apartment that I walked in and saw that in. While I was thinking about that, I knew I wanted to expose them. They weren't going to make a fool out of me, and then continue on with their lives like nothing happened. I figured enough time had passed since her sister's death to tell everyone about how the two closest people in her life had betrayed her after she died. I threw practically her entire family into a group chat without her or Joe and composed a message explaining everything my girlfriend told me. They were outraged when I told them. Many of them didn't even believe what I said. I had people calling me and screaming, telling me I was a liar and making up horrible things. I swore to them that it was the truth. Meanwhile, my girlfriend was blowing up my phone and texting me, asking me if I told her family about her and Joe. I could see that I'd accomplished everything I set out to do, so I blocked all of them. It wasn't my problem after that. A few days later, I went back to my apartment to gather my things, and I saw that Joe was still there. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He yelled at me about how he couldn't even go back to his house without worrying that my girlfriend's family was gonna hurt him. I didn't care. I just packed my things and left. I haven't spoken to my girlfriend or any of her family members since then. I moved into a new apartment and have started my life over. I feel like I lost a lot of time committing myself to the wrong person, and now I have to start over. OP, I can't believe you had to go through something like that. It seems like you were being very patient with your girlfriend because of her grief. You had your gut feelings, but tried to give her the space she needed. I always think you should trust your gut when it's telling you that something is wrong. In this case, it was right. I don't understand how your girlfriend was okay with practically pretending to be her sister with her husband. The dynamic they have is very strange, and they both need a lot of counseling to work through their issues. What they did was both wrong and very unhealthy. I think that your girlfriend's family deserves to know about that. What they were doing would have upset your girlfriend's sister. And the fact that they were probably receiving a lot of pity and apologies for their loss while betraying her is sad. I know you dedicated a lot of your life to her, but I hope you are able to move on and find someone who is loyal. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. Now let's move on to our next story. My wife and I met through our parents 8 years ago, and we got married shortly after. We joked around and told people it was an arranged marriage because that was what it felt like. They thought we would be cute together and practically forced us on our first date. I had been too focused on my career to really focus on a serious relationship before I met her. I had a lot of meaningless flings and casual partners, but I hadn't met anyone I wanted to settle down with. When we got together, it finally clicked for me. I could see what people meant when they talked about love at first sight and just knowing when you meet the right person. We had our first child together after being married for 2 years. Everything was falling into place with us, and it felt amazing. We owned our own home, had 2 kids and a dog, and were in love. My job has always been very demanding. I have to travel a lot. When I'm not traveling, I'm working late nights at the office, and I have to take work home with me quite often. That was why casual flings worked so well for me before meeting my wife. If I was in the mood, I could just call someone, and I didn't have to worry about much else. It was more difficult to balance when I was married. I would spend long days at work and come home to my wife and kids and still have to be present with them. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. I'll admit that my sex life with my wife lacked spontaneity. When we had sex, it was practically scheduled. She would tell me when she wanted to, and I would tell her a day that worked for me. Looking back, I realized that it was probably unfulfilling, but it was never brought up to me. I made good money and took care of my wife. She didn't work, so she stayed home and took care of the kids. When they were both in school, she didn't have as much to do during the day. She would tell me about how bored she would get after the house was cleaned and how she needed to find something to fill her time. She tried out a lot of different hobbies during the day, but nothing stuck. Eventually, she decided to join a cooking class at the local community center. She had always been a great cook, so I didn't understand why she needed to take a class. When I asked her about it, she said it was to expand our taste buds. She was learning all kinds of new techniques and recipes, and she was really proud of her work. I was happy that she was happy, so I didn't question it anymore. She even cooked some of the new recipes for us for dinner, and while we ate, she would rave about the things she learned. She would always talk about the class instructor and how brilliant he was. Apparently, he was very innovative and planning on opening a new restaurant in town. I had no idea anything was going on until I saw it with my own eyes. One day I got sick at work and had to go home. I was feeling bad in the morning, but I forced myself to go to work. In the middle of the day, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to go home. I was so out of it that a coworker drove me home. I didn't even think to text my wife and let her know I was on my way home. When I walked in, I saw that she had set up the dining room for a romantic dinner. There were candles and wine glasses laid out, and she was dressed up and cooking in the kitchen. I asked her what was going on, and she seemed surprised to see me. She tried to play it off as just experimenting, but I still didn't understand why there were two places set at the table. Shortly after I arrived, the doorbell rang and I answered it. A young man was on the other side and he turned pale when he saw me. He had a bottle of wine with him, so I assumed he was the dinner guest. My wife introduced me to him and told me that he was her cooking instructor. She tried to explain that she had invited him over to show him what she had learned. I didn't believe it, but I was too sick to handle it at the moment. I needed to collapse in bed and deal with it another time. It seemed fishy, but I couldn't rule out the possibility that she was telling the truth. She told me the truth. I went to my room and fell asleep in the bed. The next morning I woke up early and my wife was next to me. Part of me thought it was a dream, but I knew it wasn't. While she was sleeping, I took her phone and looked through it. There were a lot of deleted messages between her and the instructor, which was a major red flag. She was hiding something, and I knew their lunch wasn't as innocent as she tried to make it seem. I searched through her photo gallery and found a few hidden pictures of the instructor. They were mostly shirtless, but I also found one picture of another man's private parts and assumed it was his. I sent what I found to myself and put her phone back before she woke up. She had never given me any reason to suspect that she was cheating on me, but at that moment, I started to wonder if I had missed the signs because I was too busy with work. I called out of work, but told my wife I was going in. I ended up stopping by the library to use a computer and look for a good divorce attorney. After finding one, I did some research on the cooking instructor my wife had been seeing. I found his website online and saw that he was a minor cooking influencer. He had a large following on his social media pages and even had some sponsorships. I realized I could ruin all of that for him. I found out who managed the community center and contacted them, informing them of the inappropriate behavior of the instructor. He seemed to be relying on the community center's kitchen while planning his restaurant opening. I had no doubt he was depending on that income to get started. When I was finished, I stayed in town until I could go home and pretend I had been working all day. I waited until I had some information from my lawyer before telling my wife it was over. When I finally got the word, I served her with divorce papers and savored her shocked expression. I told her I knew about the instructor and she tried to deny it. When she realized there was no point, she started explaining why it happened. She told me she was feeling unfulfilled and put all the blame on me for not satisfying her and making her feel like she came second to my job. As I mentioned before, in hindsight, I can agree with that, but she never came to me and told me anything. If she had, I would have listened and tried to change for her. I would have gone to counseling if necessary. I loved her and would have done anything to make sure our relationship was okay. But she made her decision and sealed our fate. There was no going back to the way things were for me. She was disappointed and tried to convince me not to get a divorce, but it was inevitable. We ended up divorcing, and I was favored in the end because she cheated. We still have to spend a lot of time together due to custody arrangements, but we are cordial. However, I don't talk to her about anything other than the kids. OP, it sounds like you were willing to change and make sure she was happy. She might have jumped to a conclusion that you wouldn't be willing to change. It's interesting that she deleted the text messages between her and the instructor, but not the images. That seems to be what really sealed her fate there. I'm glad that you are still cordial after the divorce. I'm sure that will make things much easier for the children if you're not always fighting. But I'm sure it is very difficult for you to be around her. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.